Substantiate, to establish by proof or competent evidence. Welcome back to Substantiate. I'm the host, William Glasser, bringing you hypothetical sports matchups every single week. That's right, we back this week again. Just like every Wednesday, a little bit late this Wednesday, but I wanted to make sure I would still get this episode out this week. And it's a long one, so I split it up into two parts. Part 2 coming next week. This episode is a little bit longer than the next one, but we ended at a good place. Anyway, today, as you probably see in the title, we've got some teams that didn't quite win a championship that are going to be in this tournament here. We don't have exactly a definite way that we compare them, but still, we come to a winner for each matchup, work our way through the bracket, and at the end of the day, it's all done. So basically, here today, I'm joined by Michael Walters. And he comes and we talk about all this. Most of these teams were from before I remember sports, so he adds a lot of context, and I still did my research for everything, but, still, it's one thing to live through a time, and it's another to go on to Football Ref or Pro Football Reference and find out stats. Anyway, this week, we've got this episode. Follow us, social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at SubstantiatePod. And if you could share this episode with someone you know, that'd be great. But without further ado, let's get into my talk with Michael Walters. Today, I am joined by Michael Walters from the Flex Network. So how are you today, Michael?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. So do you want to take a minute or two and tell the listeners about yourself and your podcasts?
Sure. Yeah. So like he said, my name's Michael Walters. I currently reside in Texas, but grew up in the Pacific Northwest, kind of a good distance between the two. But yeah, went to high school and all that stuff in the Pacific Northwest. Diehard Seattle sports fan. Obviously, recent fame has probably given a lot of people some love or hate, depending how you look at it, for like the Seattle Seahawks. Big fan of them. Also, big fan of the Mariners, even though they currently hold the longest playoff sports drought in American sports right now. It was the Cubs until they won a few years back, but Seattle now holds that record. That's unfortunate, but yeah, really my favorite franchise out of anything is the Seattle Supersonics, and they're not even a team. So I'm very passionate about that topic. But yeah, big time Seattle sports fan. Washington State University is my college football and college basketball that I root for. Definitely had some disappointing moments there and some good moments as well. I always tell people it's very difficult being a Pacific Northwest sports fan, just because if it's not the 90s, then no one even knows that Washington State actually has a football team in college football. And so that's interesting. And then yeah, I have my own podcast. It's called the Flex Network. We talk fantasy football. We talk, my show talks NFL week-to-week action in the season. And you can find us, we're on every podcasting platform. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're very active on Facebook, very active on Twitter, at the Flex Network 1 on Twitter. We're all over the place. So you can find us there. And so if you enjoy the sports content, that's kind of our bread and butter, we like to say. So give us a follow, give us a like, all that good stuff. And we're just ready to rock at all times. So that's me.
Yeah, sounds great. And I know you really were the one that created this bracket that we're going to be talking about in a couple minutes. And I see you dropped some Seattle teams in there. So
yeah, I did. Well, it is, it's the heart thing there, with the Seattle teams. There's a couple of Seattle teams there that I felt just either were just disappointing or just like kind of, got the short end of the stick on a couple of different things, but we can talk about that, of course.
Yep. So today we have a bracket filled with 8 teams. These are all teams that lost the championship in their respective league. So we're going to sort of work through them today and how close they were to winning a championship. And we're going to determine a kind of redemption bracket winner. So someone is going to come out on top of this bracket, get redemption from their loss back when each team lost a championship or just didn't win one, didn't make it. So a lot of these teams are either from before I was born or I was too young to remember them. So I still did my research and I still did my homework going into this, but I'm going to be relying on Michael quite a bit in this episode to make some final decisions. But this will definitely be a fun time and give a gold medal to someone that didn't get it the first time around. So we'll get into that.
Yeah, my kind of feeling with the whole bracket was I've thought about this often, kind of what are the greatest teams in sports history that never won a championship, but were absolutely deserving? And if they didn't run into team X, whoever that team is, right, in their respective sports, if they didn't run into the GOAT of that sport or that team that was just assembled in the right time, in the right moment, could they have won a championship? And I honestly believe in with all of these teams, they either disappointed or they got the short end of the stick or they ran into a GOAT. And we'll discuss that obviously, but each of these teams have what I would call like unique situations.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a whole bracket of just the teams that lost either in the conference finals or the finals to Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the 90s. So we branched out a little further than just sticking to that. But yeah, you could definitely take this in a million different directions. So I guess we can start by, we'll just read through the bracket real quick, and then we'll hop into each game. So there are going to be 3 rounds here, the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals. And so 8 teams total. We're going to talk about 7 different matchups depending on who advances. So, Michael, would you like to read through the first half of the bracket?
Yeah, sure. So for the listeners out there, I'm obviously a Seattle sports fan. So if you're like, man, why is that team in there? That's why. Just know that these are things that have directly impacted me growing up, whether I was a kid. How old are you, by the way?
14.
Okay, you're 14. I'm 33 years old. Okay, so understand that. Okay. So he's 14 and I'm 33. So you definitely weren't alive for some of these teams, and that's totally cool. Okay, so let's start here. And I didn't place these teams in the bracket based off of, hey, I think this is a number 1 seed. I just placed them in the bracket randomly. So the team that I put number 1 was the 1995-96 Seattle Supersonics in the NBA. Very competitive, very good team. A lot of people consider them to be one of the best teams in the NBA during that time. Sean Kemp, Gary Payton, of course, played in the era of Michael Jordan, so you might know how this one ends up, but that's all right. Number 2 team that I put in here was the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Ties Major League Baseball record for most wins in a single season by any Major League Baseball franchise with 116 wins in one season. So that's a big deal there. Number 3 is I put in the 90s Buffalo Bills, specifically 1990 to 1993. Buffalo went to the Super Bowl 4 straight years. I'm sure you can guess how that ended up, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And then number 4, I put the New England Patriots in there. The only team to have an undefeated season and win a championship was the 1972 Miami Dolphins. And the only team to have an undefeated regular season was the 2007 New England Patriots. So there's a lot of topics there that we can talk about for the first 4.
Yeah, and when the 2007 New England Patriots lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl there, go Giants. So,
Right.
um, so now I'll just go through the second half of the bracket real quick. So, first is the 1982 to 84 Houston Cougars basketball team, and as of now, we're recording this. They just advanced to the Final Four in 2021. So Houston Cougars coming back with some basketball, and that team was with Hakeem Olajuwon, with Michael Young, and plenty more. And then the next team is going to be another NCAA basketball team, and that's the Fab Five, the 1991 to 93 Michigan team. Go Blue. And then and that's Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, Juwan Howard, Jimmy King, and Ray Jackson, as well as some others. Even Lakers GM now, Rob Pelinka. And then the seventh team is the 2000 to 2001 Dallas Mavericks with Michael Finley, Dirk Nowitzki, and Juwan Howard shows up twice in this bracket. So that's kind of funny here. He's got 2 chances at winning. And then the Seattle Seahawks from 2014 to 2015 Super Bowl are going to fill out this bracket with the 8th seed, but the seeds were random. So that is this bracket, and I think we should just go right on in and talk about the first matchup, the Supersonics versus the Mariners.
Yeah, so let's order this bracket in the way where we'll talk about the 1 and 2 seed, and then we'll jump down to the 8 versus 7, and then just kind of work our way to the middle. Okay, so let's
sounds good.
Let's start at the top. The 95-96 Supersonics, right? You have on your team Gary Payton, who is at the time as well-versed of a player as there is, as MVP caliber as a player as there is in the NBA. This is old school basketball, right? We're talking the 90s. I guess you don't know, but that's fine. But the 90s was a so much more physical style of basketball, where if you came into the lane and you got your arm slapped or something, the referees weren't calling fouls like they are nowadays. Nowadays, guys like James Harden can get away with only playing offense and can barely get slapped and will get all the calls, you know. These foul calls were rampant. That didn't exist in the 90s. Guys like Steph Curry, guys like James Harden, even Kyrie Irving, or, I mean, even LeBron, for the fact of the matter, I think LeBron would barely make it in the 90s just because he relies so much on the foul call. You know, you're talking about an era of basketball where if you came into the paint and Shaquille O'Neal was down there, he would clothesline you for even having the audacity to get into the paint where he lives, you know? And not only would it hurt because he would actually hurt you when he fouled you, but you would think twice about it next time, you know? So there's that. But you're talking about a 95-96 Seattle Supersonics team with Gary Payton, obviously, very good defender, and could really generate offense and could score at will. Also had a good mid-range shot, had a pretty decent 3-point shot, could drive the lane, all that good stuff. And then you had Shawn Kemp down low, a guy that was Shaquille O'Neal before Shaquille O'Neal really jumped onto the scene. And Shawn Kemp is nowadays known as one of the most underrated dunkers of all time. If you do yourself a favor, if you're listening to this, go to YouTube and just type in Shawn Kemp career highlights, and you will see some incredible dunks. You'll see some good blocks. You'll just see all around, for a big man, some great basketball. And then you had a guy like Detlef Schrempf, you know, a German guy that could get in there, old school type of player, really kind of tried to model his game after a Larry Bird and stuff like that. He was great in his own right. But the number one problem they had was, man, if we want to win the title, we got to go through Michael Jordan. And of course, they get to the NBA Finals and they lose to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Like we said earlier, let's add Utah to that list. Let's add Reggie Miller and the Pacers to that list. Let's add the New York Knicks to that list, and anyone else that was in their way on the way to the championship, you know? And so there's obviously that's such a big deal. But that's why I said this is one of those teams that was one of the greatest teams of all time that never won a championship. They lost to the Chicago Bulls in 6 games. A lot of Seattle fans actually look at it. They say things like, man, we would have won if Gary Payton had covered Michael Jordan the whole series, because the Sonics lost to the Chicago Bulls in 6 games, but Gary Payton didn't decide defensively to match up against Michael Jordan until game 5. And to me, and you can kind of hit on this, if you have an elite defender and you consider that person an elite defender and you say as a coach or a GM, whatever, that guy can guard anybody, then the only way to really know he can guard anybody is to put him on the best. And if we're going to put him on the best, that's how we got to figure it out. And so to me, it was, I don't really know what was going on, but Gary Payton lining up on Michael Jordan in game 5, he did a good job. He did a good job in game 6 as well. It was just too little too late. And so that's where they fell short, obviously.
Yeah, in Detlef Schrempf, I'm currently in the middle of watching Parks and Rec, and he shows up a couple times. So.
Yeah, he does.
Although they talk about him from being on the Pacers, but anyway, little.
How dare they?
A fun little fact there. Yeah, and I actually have an ongoing series in 2K with one of my friends where I play as the 0001 Lakers and he plays as the 95-96 Supersonics. And I mean, that series has been going on for years now, and it's close.
Hey, that's a trustworthy friend that you have there. He sounds like a good guy.
Yeah, he was actually a guest on the podcast back in the early days of the podcast last September.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. So now let's get into the Sonics opponents. Another Seattle team, that's going to be the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Tell us a little about them.
Oh, man. This one's, like I mentioned earlier, this one's heartbreaking just because it's like the 2001 Seattle Mariners. So the Seattle Mariners come out. They have a guy by the name of Ichiro Suzuki. I don't know if you've heard of him. Well, Ichiro comes out. He's this phenom coming out of Japan, right? Spent some years in Japan playing baseball overseas and stuff. You know, born and raised in Japan, grew up over there, right? But the most important thing is you had Lou Piniella, a good manager. Let's see. You had Brett Boone. You had Carlos Guillen, Mike Cameron, Edgar Martinez, Hall of Famer Edgar Martinez, by the way, Mark McLemore, Jay Buhner, who's a Seattle legend. When I was a kid, Jay Buhner used to actually, if you went to Seattle Mariners games, you could show up to the game early and get in line for what they called a Buhner buzz, because Jay Buhner was bald himself. He would put a Bic razor on his head. He was bald to the skin, right? So you could show up and get in line and Jay Buhner would buzz your head for you, right? So when I was like 12 years old, I got a buzz cut by Jay Buhner and it was like the coolest thing in the world, because I was like, man, I can't believe I'm meeting Jay Buhner. You know, he was a great hitter. You know, and we had some good players on the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Well, the Mariners, what happened is they actually tied the Major League Baseball record for the most wins in a single season. They tied the Chicago Cubs. I would have to look up to know what year that the Cubs won 116. But yeah, they won 116. It was such a dream season. It was incredible. Just, I mean, every game seemed like an offensive explosion. It seemed like pitching dominance. I mean, because how many games are in a baseball season, right? 162, is that the number?
Yep.
And you're telling me you're getting a win in 116 of them? That's awesome. It's almost opposite that nowadays for the Seattle Mariners. And so it was such a good time to be a Mariners fan. And I mean, I still really enjoy being a Mariners fan now. It's just things are different. They're trying to build a farm system and all that good stuff. But the Mariners win 116 games. They go into the playoffs, and I believe they lost in the divisional round to the New York Yankees. And it was just one of those things that it's like, I feel like everyone loses to the Yankees. And so, you know, regardless of what team you are in the American League, you have not the same exact story, but a story of, hey, we had a good season and then we play the Yankees and then it ended. You know, but yeah, we lost to the Yankees. And it was just really disheartening because it's like, man, you couldn't help but feel like we wasted so much because we won 116 games. We were the best team in Major League Baseball. We had the most wins. We tied a Major League Baseball record, and we go to the playoffs and we just lose to the Yankees. Like, so does it mean anything that we made the playoffs? And a part of me says, no, it doesn't mean anything because you lost. You didn't even make it to the World Series. You didn't even make it to the American League Championship game. So to me, I mean, but you're a New York sports fan, right? So know the Yankees, man, that's just how they were, they were kicking
96 to 01,
Yeah,
World Series every year except for one.
Yeah. And so 01, I remember, was 01 the year that the Diamondbacks beat the Yankees in the World Series?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Luis Gonzalez, I'll never forget that hit that he had that he sent into center field that won the game for the Diamondbacks and all that stuff. A lot of Seattle people rooted for the Diamondbacks that year. Well, partly because the Yankees beat us, but another big reason was because they had Randy Johnson, who was a pitcher, and he was a Seattle Mariners legend. But yeah, that whole season for the Mariners it was such a letdown once we got to the playoffs, because it was like, you knew we were capable of more, but I couldn't help but think maybe we were just really worn out by that point. 116 wins, that's hard to get.
Yeah. And you mentioned Randy Johnson there, was also a Yankee for a couple of years. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, Ichiro was just such a fun player to watch. After he left the Yankees and he was on the Miami Marlins, there was a game when the Marlins were playing in New York in Yankee Stadium, and I was there. And Ichiro was just out there in batting practice, having fun and being Ichiro. Like, he was such a great player. And then also when he was on the Yankees, being to games and watching him just in batting practice and warming up in the outfield, he was just such a fun player. And the whole team, I mean, obviously they were competitors. They won 116 games, but obviously falling short to the Yankees is nothing to be ashamed of. But
yeah, but I've often said this in professional sports, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, MLB, when the historic franchises are good, that makes the sport better, So when the Yankees are good, it's awesome. When the Celtics and the Lakers are good, it's awesome. In the NFL, when the Cowboys are good, as much as people hate to, I mean, I live here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I'm a Seahawks fan, and I can't stand the Cowboys, but I'll tell you, when the Cowboys are good, when these historic franchises like the Pittsburgh Steelers, when those teams are good, it makes the league better. Because those other teams are like, man, they look at their schedule and they say, man, when are we playing Pittsburgh? When are we playing the Celtics? Like, those are the teams that we want to beat because they're good and they're a historic franchise. And so it just makes, from top to bottom, it just makes the league better. And as a fan, it makes it more entertaining for you. I remember growing up seeing, I think I was in high school, I was at a game when Ichiro hit a walk-off home run on Mariano Rivera, which I don't know how many people can say that in their career that ever happened, because Mariano Rivera is as locked down as it gets. And you can do any type of Google search you want on that. I know that happened because I was there. And I used to have the guy that was the play-by-play guy on the radio, Dave Niehaus, for the Mariners. I had his call of that home run as a ringtone on my phone for a little while. Because it's such a historic moment. It's unbelievable. And so, yeah, just, like I said earlier, top to bottom, the Mariners they're so disappointing that year. And I mean, most of the year was really great. It was just the ending that was disappointing. But yeah, so that's why they're on the list, because great regular season. And then it just quickly died as soon as the Yankees came to town. So.
Yeah. Wow. I just pulled up that home run and it was a great call.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, you rooted for both of these teams, the Sonics and the Mariners. Who's it going to be? Who's moving on?
I'm going to move on the Supersonics because they actually made it to the championship round.
Fair enough.
The Mariners did not, and the Mariners didn't even lose to a team that won the championship. So at least the Supersonics lost in the championship to Michael Jordan, who's considered the GOAT. Well, in my generation, that we consider him the GOAT. Some of these kids around nowadays, they consider LeBron the GOAT of today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've always subscribed to the theory that MJ was the GOAT of the 90s, Kobe was the GOAT of the 2000s, and LeBron's kind of the GOAT of the 2010s. So we'll see how that shapes up. But yeah, got to move on the Sonics there.
All right. So next, moving on in the first round, the 2001 Dallas Mavericks versus the 2014 Seattle Seahawks.
Okay, let's go to the Mavericks. I'm living here in Dallas. I obviously don't have the Sonics, right? And so even when I was a kid, I always liked the Dallas Mavericks because I liked Steve Nash a lot. I liked Dirk Nowitzki a lot. And this specific team had Michael Finley to go with that, right? The 2001 Dallas Mavericks were so good. It's unbelievable where they're at or where they were, and that they weren't able to get a championship or really do any damage. The Dallas Mavericks, I mean, think about the career of Steve Nash. Think about the career of Dirk. Dirk is a top 10 scorer in NBA history.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get there on accident. You know what I'm saying? So that's just one of those things that it's like, man, maybe those guys turn into legends later, and we just really didn't realize how good they were in the moment. But the 2001, 2002 Dallas Mavericks were incredible. Let's see. So they had Don Nelson as their head coach, who's a good coach. Mark Cuban had definitely owned the Mavericks at that point. They were good, but let's look at their roster, right? You had Sean Bradley, Michael Finley, Avery Johnson, Steve Nash, Dirk, Nick Van Exel. I mean, that's enough right there to say,
yeah,
there's so many names there. Even if you're not a basketball fan, there's a lot of names right there that would just bring you kind of like some these feelings of nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
The Mavericks in the regular season, they finished second. They had a record of 57-25. They were the fourth seed coming out of the Western Conference. So they fell behind the Los Angeles Lakers. I mean, obviously Kobe was there. They fell behind the San Antonio Spurs, which obviously San Antonio had Tim Duncan. But understand that the game difference between the first, second, third, and fourth seed in the Western Conference that year, maximum from the 1 seed to the 4 seed, was 4 games. That's how close they were. They were all on that same level.
Wow.
And then the number 1 seed that year was the Sacramento Kings, which is kind of crazy nowadays thinking about that, right? Because you look at the Sacramento Kings and you're like, what in the world? The Sacramento Kings, they had Chris Webber, they had Mike Bibby, they had a lot. They had some players out there. And so as we sit here, so they finished the 4 seed. And then let me see here. If we can get to their playoff record, I can tell you who they lost to in the playoffs. So they beat Minnesota, and then after Minnesota, they had to play Sacramento, who was the 1 seed in the playoffs. And so they actually lost. They lost the first one, they won the second one, and then they lost 3 straight after that, because 4 wins you the series. So they lost 3 straight, and it was just Michael Finley was taking over some of those games. It just wasn't enough. If you've ever watched the old school San Antonio Spurs, or you watch old school basketball with Sacramento, it was pass 5 times, get the ball in the paint, dunk, layup, whatever. Is those old school types of coaches. They always believe in passing more times than anything else. They don't want to see any type of selfish players. It's true team basketball. So they just kind of ran into a monster, but they were so good and they just didn't realize it yet. And then Mark Cuban blew up the team, which was unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Well, how many years later did they win the championship?
So the Mavericks didn't win the championship until 2010.
Right. Okay, so that's another 9 years.
Right. And so it took So for them, they blew up the team, and then it took all these years of Dirk playing at such a high level. And the year that they won the championship was really the year that Dirk was just untouchable. They played Oklahoma City, wiped the floor with them. They swept a Kobe Bryant Los Angeles Lakers team. I don't care if the Lakers are good or not. If Kobe's on your team, you're competitive, right? They swept a Kobe team.
Yeah, that year in 2009 to 2010, Dirk had a 42% three-point percentage.
That's insane, right?
And that's before shooting three-pointers was popular in that sense.
But so, William, here's some things that people don't realize about Dirk. Dirk was consistently good during that regular season. But as soon as the playoffs started, Dirk flipped like a light switch or something. Something went off where he decided, I'm unguardable from this point forward. No one's going to guard me. He faced OKC, right? Kendrick Perkins was in his face guarding him. If you remember Dirk would turn around and he would back you down, and then he would do this half spin. And when he spun around, his right knee would be kind of up in your chest, and then he would be fading away. And so the way that he did that and his length and him being a 7-footer and all that stuff combined, his shot was unblockable. I remember watching the playoffs and seeing Kendrick Perkins smothering Dirk, but still when his hand would go up to block Dirk's shot, it was still a good 6 to 8 inches away from the ball. I mean, he was just untouchable. He could not be stopped in the playoffs. And I think what it was that year was he just realized, he's like, this is my legit shot. We have a team. We have Jason Terry coming off the bench, sniping 3-pointers. We have Jason Kidd leading the offense, creating offense for a lot of guys, being a great passer, having a high basketball IQ. And he knew that he was the guy, that they were not going to be able to be successful without him. And they ended up beating in 6 games in the NBA Finals a Miami Heat team that consisted of Dwayne Wade, LeBron James. That's pretty much all I need to say. But Chris Bosh. But that was when super teams really started, right? When LeBron decided he was going to Miami. And so the Mavs beat them in 6 games. And a lot of people thought they weren't going to win. But a part of me knew, man, Dirk's really on fire right now. And so once again, it just couldn't be stopped. Dirk was untouchable in the finals. It was cool to see.
All right. So we've got the Mavericks. Now, this 2014 Seattle Seahawks team, they're coming off a year where the year before they win the Super Bowl, they beat the Broncos. And Peyton Manning, I believe, was on the Broncos at that point.
He was. We beat the most historically efficient offensive team in the history of football. They scored more points. They racked up more yards, and they had more touchdowns than any other team in NFL history at that point. And the Seahawks beat them in Super Bowl. That was XL, so that was, what Super Bowl was that?
40.
40?
Wait, XL would be 40, but then, no, that must have been like XLVII, maybe 48. Quick editing note here. Yes, it was Super Bowl 48.
What I do remember, which is the most important thing to remember, I remember the Seahawks beat the Broncos 42-8 in that Super Bowl. And it was a beatdown from the first snap of the game. If you remember the game in 2013, the first snap of the game, the Broncos center snapped the ball over Peyton Manning's head, and it rolled out of the back of the end zone for safety. So 12 seconds into the game, the Seahawks were up 2-0, and they never looked back after that. It was a beatdown from start to finish. And, you know, part of me is always like, man, I wish this game was competitive, blah, 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 all that stuff. But, hey, when you're a fan of the Seahawks and they're winning by 42-8, there's nothing better, especially in a Super Bowl. I was on cloud 9 because I suffered through the 7 and 9 years and the 4 and 12 years and all that stuff. And so I was so happy to see it come to fruition, you know, but yeah.
Now that was, you got a good game the next year with the 2014 team, but didn't exactly end the way you would want it to. Do you want to talk about that interception at the end of the game?
Yeah, so let's start by saying we shouldn't have even been in the game. Like we did not deserve to be in that Super Bowl because in the NFC Championship, we had one of the most improbable comebacks of all time. At one point in the NFC Championship, losing to the Green Bay Packers 28-3, Russell Wilson at this point had thrown 4 interceptions. Russell Wilson, when Jermaine Kearse, wide receiver, he used to play for the Seahawks, when he was on the team, Russell Wilson had a really bad habit of targeting Jermaine Kearse, mostly because Jermaine Kearse had an ability to get open. But in that Packers game, I think the Packers realized, hey, he likes to target that guy a lot, so we're going to put our best corner on him. And so Sam Shields was their best corner at the time, I believe. But yeah, like I said, it's the third quarter. The Green Bay Packers get an interception for Russell Wilson's 4th interception of the game. Instead of trying to run it back for a touchdown, he slides because he can't believe it. They're up 28-3, and Russell Wilson throws an interception, right? Seattle makes this incredible comeback. We score a touchdown late. We're down by 4 points, right? And there's no time left. It's ridiculous how much time's left. We kick an onside kick. Brian Bostic, I believe was his name, who was a tight end for the Packers, went up to catch the ball. It bounced off of his chest. Seahawks player Chris Matthews catches the onside kick. We get the ball back. We score. We go for 2. And one of those plays where Russell Wilson kind of scrambles out of trouble, spins 3 or 4 times, throws just a rainbow type of pass into the end zone. Luke Wilson catches it, 2-point conversion. Now we're up by 3. But the only problem with that is you got Aaron Rodgers on the other side of the ball. If you give him any more than 20 seconds, there's a pretty good chance he's going to march down the field and at minimum get in the field goal range.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what happened. They get in the field goal range. Mason Crosby comes out, ice water in his veins, kicks the field goal. Bam. We're going to overtime in the NFC Championship game, right? And every Seahawks fan is sick to their stomach because what we remember about going to overtime with the Green Bay Packers is the older days, the early 2000s days, Seattle is playing in the divisional round against the Green Bay Packers. Matt Hasselbeck is the quarterback. They go into overtime. They do the coin toss. Seahawks win the coin toss. Matt Hasselbeck says, we want the ball and we're going to score. And it was picked up on the referee's microphone. So the whole stadium heard it. The whole broadcast heard it. First play, run play, picked up a few yards. Second play, Matt Hasselbeck throws to his left side on like a quick hitch route. Him and the receiver miscommunicate. Al Harris picks it up, runs it back for a touchdown, game over. Green Bay advances. So a lot of Seattle fans are having these nightmares of that game, right? Russell Wilson, of course, doesn't say anything. He's not saying, hey, we want the ball, we're going to score. He just says, we want the ball. So gets the ball, runs a couple of plays. It's 3rd and long. He throws a floater towards the sideline for Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin picks up 20-something yards, falls out of bounds. Next play, they run Jermaine Kearse, as I mentioned before, up the seam into the end zone. Russell Wilson throws him a floater into the back of the end zone. Jermaine Kearse catches it for a touchdown, completely redeems himself after all 4 of those interceptions, chunks the ball into the stands, whatever. Seattle's going back to the Super Bowl, right? And then, of course, you get to the Super Bowl that year. Seattle's playing against the New England Patriots. Marshawn Lynch is on the team. We have, on the D-line, we got Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, all these guys. That same Legion of Boom is still there, all those guys, right? They do pretty well against Tom Brady. Tom Brady scores, but he scores and leaves too much time on the clock. So Seattle's coming down the field. There's not that much time left. We throw this pass to the sideline. Jermaine Kearse once again does one of those crazy bobble catches where he hits the ball 3 or 4 times, catches it off of his leg, but no one touches him. So he stands up and he tries to run it in, but gets pushed out at the 2-yard line. It's 1st down and goal from the 2-yard line. And Seattle, this is like disgusting for me to even talk about. Seattle throws the ball on the goal line on a quick, what do? It's a wide receiver screen of some sort. It's like a middle screen, but the slot receiver is supposed to come open right and catch it right at the seam and be able to sit down in the end zone. They throw it. It's, of course, intercepted by Malcolm Butler in the end zone. Patriots win the game. And is by far to this day, one of the worst play calls of all time. And we haven't been that far in the playoffs since 2014 or 15. What year was that? That was 14. Yeah.
Yeah. So the 15 Super Bowl. And
yeah.
you just think about Russell Wilson. Like, how old was he then? And then now he's 6 years older going into next season. And, there's trade rumors with him. He doesn't want out of Seattle, but if he does get traded, he wants to go to these teams. Now there's all this stuff going on. In same head coach, they just haven't been able to get back there. So now, obviously, to me, it sounds like this one should be going to the Seahawks over the Mavericks just because of how close they were to actually winning it. They were one play away. But why would someone pick the Mavericks here?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to pick the Mavericks, and I think because the Mavericks just didn't even realize how good they were at the time, or maybe they hadn't realized their potential because they had so many good players. But the Seahawks were literally inches away. And, there's a lot of conspiracies out there about the Seahawks. And that year, they knew if they would have given the ball to Marshawn Lynch and he would have scored, which he would have, because at that point in the game, he had over 170 yards and 2 touchdowns already, that you would have had to give that guy who doesn't like the media, who doesn't want to talk to reporters, who every time you ask him, he's got a funny quote. I mean, you could YouTube Marshawn Lynch right now and get all types of funny content out of him,
Welcome back to Editing Me, and yes, I did YouTube it. Here's what I found.
How you doing, big fella?
Smooth.
You look good.
You do too.
You all right?
Man, I'm smooth.
You kind of shy.
Nah,
You just don't want to talk, really.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is. I ain't never seen no talking with me nothing.
Yeah.
Yep. Been like that since I was little. Was raised like that.
Well, I respect it.
Yeah.
You excited about the game?
Hell yeah. Yeah.
See, these are real emotions, man.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
I'm just here so I won't get fined, boss.
Yeah, I'm finna slide up in this thing, right? You know what I mean? Just to break the monotony a little bit. Marshawn ain't really trying to say nothing to you guys, okay? You can direct your questions to me. Check.
Michael, how is Marshawn feeling about this?
Hey, man, he hadn't talked to you guys most of his life. I think he just said that. He just wants to play ball.
Yeah, so that clip really shows he really doesn't love the media. He literally pretended to not even be himself just so that he could get out of answering some questions straight up. So, anyway, let's get back to hear what Michael says.
Marshawn Lynch isn't that guy that you can put in front of a camera and be like, oh, this is a Super Bowl MVP, just because that's not how they did business. But Marshawn Lynch was as deserving as it gets in that situation. And so that was just man, it's so crazy because Marshawn Lynch would have absolutely plowed through that Patriots defensive line for 2 yards and scored a touchdown. I mean, you saw it even late when Seattle signed Marshawn Lynch back a couple of seasons ago in the playoffs, and they gave him the ball on the goal line. Guess what? There were like 4 dudes in his face, and he still plowed through him and scored. So there's no way that Marshawn Lynch in his prime wouldn't have scored right there. It was just unbelievable. Man, there was just so many things about. My wife and I were at my mother-in-law's friend's house for that Super Bowl, and they were all drinking and partying and doing all that stuff, weren't really paying attention to the Super Bowl, but I definitely was because that's my team in the Super Bowl, And when they threw that ball on the goal line, it was an interception. I tried to walk home. I was a good 50 miles away from my house. I was so heated I was ready to walk home 50 miles. I did not care. That was days before Uber was a thing, you know? So I was like so mad that I was just like willing to walk home. I was like, I'm 50 miles away from my house, but I'm going to walk home because that's how heated I am right now. I did not care. My wife actually ended up driving next to me in the car. She's like, "Are you going to get in the car?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I will." And so I had gotten in the car, but I was, man, oh my gosh, did I hear it from people at work and everywhere else? You know, everyone I knew was writing on my Facebook, sending me text messages, hitting me up on Instagram, whatever, you know, I was just like, man, oh my gosh, it's like the worst time in the world. It just sucks that we were literally 6 feet away from being a dynasty.
Yeah. I mean,
that was tough.
I think it was the year before, I think, when they lost power in the Super Bowl, but that's neither here nor there. So let's move on to game number 3, which is going to be the 1990 to 1993 Buffalo Bills went to the Super Bowl, lost all 4 in a row. Versus the 2007 New England Patriots, who lose to the Giants. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Come back next week, part 2, next Wednesday, part 2 of this conversation where we finish up the first round and go on into the second and third rounds. And I guess then we'll find out who's going to be winning this redemption bracket. So until then, if you could share this on your social media or share it with a friend, send a link to someone you know, helps grow the podcast a ton. And until then, have a great week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Substantiate. The best way to help support the show is to, number 1, tell your friends about Substantiate. That is the number 1 way to support us. The second way is to leave us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. Number 3, follow us at SubstantiatePod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.